So a very good morning and welcome everybody to this CII Corporate Governance Summit. This is the 14th in the series, but the first time that one is doing it in a manner in which we are in terms of a virtual conference. But we have a phenomenal response, and we are indeed most grateful to have the SEBI chairman be the chief guest of this inaugural function. And we have approximately about 700 odd participants from across the country who are here today. So a warm welcome to everybody, and a warm welcome to especially to the chairman of SEBI, Mr. Ajay Tyagi. We have a strong panel of speakers at the inaugural session with Mr. Uday Kotak, the president of CII, Mr. K.K. Mistry, the chairman of the CII's Council on Corporate Governance, and of course, Mr. Shamak Tata, who has been the CII chairman again for the Committee on Financial Reporting. We have officials from the SEBI, members from the industry, large participants, as I mentioned, or welcome everybody. And just wanted to mention that I really must acknowledge the participation and SEBI's most approachable approach, if I can say, during the last year. And despite the pandemic challenges, we from the industry, from the CII, we have had several interactions with the chairman and the SEBI team over virtual mode. Mr. Tyagi, thank you very much for all your support, especially for the last during this very troubled times that we had. And welcome to this session today, and really to protect, if one can say, the interest of investors and to enhance corporate governance standards in our country. SEBI, under your leadership, Mr. Tyagi, has introduced several reforms during, just if we look at the last 1 year. And these reforms really help streamline the functioning of our companies, member corporates, and facilitated industry continue functioning as normal as possible despite the COVID-19 challenges. And all these important initiatives really help reduce, of course, the market volatility. It enhances liquidity, improves overall transparency and governance and standards of the industry. So there are quite a few, as I mentioned, things which SEBI facilitated over the last 1 year or so. But a couple, one, of course, was allowing relaxation from quarterly compliances like statements, statement of investor complaints, corporate governance report, financial results, and relaxation of time gap between two board and audit committee. Also, last week, SEBI issued the new sustainability reporting requirements for listed entities. A new report called the BRSR, which will replace the BRR, and laying emphasis on quantifiable metrics, allowing for easy measurement and comparability across companies, sectors, and time, the time period. So that will be very useful. And CII was a part of the SEBI deliberations, and we really welcome those announcements. And thirdly, also keeping in sync with the need for risk management given the changing business dynamics, requirements to constitute risk management committee has been extended from the top 500 listed entities to the top 1,000 listed entities. A more streamlined delisting processes has also been approved. All these steps actually will definitely lead to better governance frameworks. There are many more initiatives undertaken by SEBI, and all these measures are indeed very positive, and in the long term will act as a fillip to growth of the Indian capital markets and corporate governance standards. And in fact, at the CII, we reckon that the few of the relaxations introduced during the COVID-19 period could be extended rather than carried in perpetuity. There are, we have, as I mentioned, a very fine senior group of from the corporate sector, from the industry, and we would look forward to a couple of requests and recommendations coming from the industry as we go along in this inaugural session, taking advantage of your presence, Mr. Tyagi, today. But just to introduce the conference today, the summit, I'd like to mention that the subject of corporate governance has been over decades now finding phenomenal prominence in CII's top priorities. And CII has always has long been a proponent of corporate governance in India. And we have worked very closely with you, and you have seen some of the work done in the last few years, and from the voluntary code of corporate governance, which was released as early as 1998, to the report of the CII task force in 2009, and the CII guidelines on integrity and transparency in governance and responsible code of conduct 2020, which was released last year. We continue to establish to be very, very responsible, taking lead in recommending corporate governance practices for corporates in true letter and spirit. And the 2020 CII corporate governance guidelines, which I just mentioned, they enumerate 15 recommendations on topical issues covering organizational culture and values, including its commitment to integrity, fairness, honesty, transparency, ethical conduct. And as a responsible corporate citizen, the guidelines assert that an organization will integrate ESG principles in business, and anti-money laundering steps and precautions will form a part of the organizational work. Would really be forming the part of the organizational work plan essentials to protect the integrity of the markets and the global financial framework. So as you know that we also work very closely with the government, with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and we had formed this very important institution called the National Foundation for Corporate Governance. So against this backdrop, this CII Corporate Governance Summit, which was planned over today and tomorrow, we are focusing on a few important themes. One is, of course, the board's preparedness to manage disruption in COVID-19 crisis. The second is on resilience and risk management to survive uncertainty. The third part is cybersecurity, data governance, and corporate governance. And the fourth is role, responsibility, and liability of independent directors. So once again, I just wanted to welcome you, Mr. Tyagi, for being present here today as our chief guest. You have always had this interaction with the industry very regularly, and your presence here today is a source of great encouragement. And thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to once again welcome all our very distinguished speakers and participants. Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, I'd now request Mr. Shamak Tata for his remarks, please. Mr. Shamak Tata.
Thank you. And am I audible?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Tyagi is the chairperson of the Securities Board of India. Mr. Uday Kotak is the president of the CII in this role. Mr. Mistry as chairperson of the CII Corporate Governance Committee in this role. Sanjit, and of course, so many eminent people did this inaugural. Good morning to everyone. I thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to this esteemed audience at CII's first virtual corporate governance summit. The previous year's summit was held in February of 2020, and little did we realize then that the next would be a virtual one and have a much wider participation. Some might say the benefit of current times, to others, a learning of the realm of possibilities. 2020 was not a year like none other. It was a year of crisis. It was also a year of hope and resilience. Hope that we will respond and recover, to be able to emerge from this crisis and be resilient to be able to thrive in the next one. Last year, I had, in my words, explained corporate governance as simply enabling expected corporate behaviors in an increasingly integrated, more informed, engaged, and ever-evolving society. 1 year on, the core remains the same. However, the speed to integrate, to be informed, and to be engaged has accelerated, and societal expectations are evolving faster than ever. This has morphed corporate behaviors, which are suddenly faced with an absolutely unexpected and unimagined threats. I'm going to take this opportunity today to share some thoughts on what I believe it will need to govern in the world reshaped by the pandemic. When we talk about corporate governance, I look at fundamentally four players in this ecosystem: the entity with its management and board, other third-party fiduciary role holders like auditors and rating agencies, corporate lenders, and the regulators, as providers of documented framework of rules, regulations governing governance, and monitoring of its implementation. The beneficiaries of good governance are the stakeholders, and they comprise, in addition to shareholders, the workforce, the customers and vendors, and the communities in which the entity operates. This pandemic, its multiple waves and its aftermath, is testing the stamina and foundation of this governance ecosystem and the impact on beneficiaries. As we speak, there are news emerging of returning waves and mutations of the virus, lockdown in cities across Europe and Asia, and challenges relating to adverse vaccine outcomes. History will necessarily judge with hindsight, and thus boards and regulators have a growing responsibility to know more, to understand fully, to be agile, and to communicate honestly and have the ability to look around corners, to be able to effectively govern and regulate through a crisis. For corporate boards, this environment is characterized by pressures and demands from various stakeholder groups, heightened expectations for societal engagement, endless operational disruptions, and radical uncertainty about the future. These factors are complicating the board decision-making and challenging shareholder-centric model of governance that has guided boards and the business leaders for the past several decades. Take, for example, dividend payments. Ordinarily, the decision would be a relatively straightforward matter of applying a stated dividend policy or choosing an amount based on shareholder expectations and the company's earnings for the period. But this year, with COVID-19 challenging the economy and prolonging uncertainty about the depth and duration of the crisis, the decision becomes more complex and takes into account multiple factors. Employees not being given increments, vendors not being paid on time, perception of a company vis-a-vis societal expectations. A decision that would typically require only a few minutes of board discussion becomes long deliberations. Even the banking regulator stepped in to have a say. Allow me to borrow an experience from another crisis. Following the 9/11 attacks, the US securities agencies consulted Hollywood scriptwriters to develop scenarios on how future terrorist threats might unfold. This was a suggestion in the 9/11 Commission report, which identified the failure of imagination as a limiting factor in US national security policy and noted, imagination is not a gift usually associated with bureaucracies. Additionally, board members were also not expected to use their imagination in overseeing disruption, innovation, and the associated risks. Rather, boards have been expected to bring a sharp inquiry, sober judgment, and sound advice to their oversight of organizational risks and the executive team's approach to business. But I believe a case can now be made for making imagination and innovation regular ingredients in the heady mix of corporate governance. Innovation is not a prerogative of the technologists or the R&D centers. Not going too far, we've all seen examples of many innovations in our everyday lives. No contact food delivery, contact-facing apps, etc. Expectations for board oversight are arising because of uncertainties and the risks attendant. The pandemic has shrunk timelines of transformation journeys from years to a matter of months. Corporate boards are facing a string of difficult decisions and at the same time are uniquely positioned to oversee and set their organization's culture and direction for the long term, ready for the next norm. Reminds me of what Charles Darwin had to say. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. Innovation and change will also bring increasing uncertainties, and the board will have a pivotal role of stepping in and walking with management through these. Drivers of innovation and change also demand imagination, and that requires heterogeneous thinking in boardrooms. A case for heterogeneous and diverse boards that work with a homogeneous corporate purpose is becoming stronger than it ever was. Whether COVID-19 is truly an inflection point for corporate governance is yet to be seen. But there is no doubt that the pandemic has changed the core premise of the agency-based model of governance in ways that have important implications for all boards. Now more than ever, the corporate governance frameworks embedded within organizations need to evolve and support organizational resilience through the following 6 items. 1. Effective leadership and engaging board oversight. 2. More structured attention to and communication with stakeholders. More deliberative, clear, and transparent decision. Continuous oversight on risk management, mitigation, and control. The 5th, focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And finally, more attention to how business and society coexist. Not surprising, it is also expected that the boardroom agendas will also expand beyond the perennial agenda items such as strategy and execution, executive compensation, and focus on new emerging topics such as corporate purpose, human capital management, cybersecurity, and climate and other environmental and sustainability matters. While corporates are evolving and learning new ways of working, regulators have also not been far behind. CB spoke about some of them. The Indian regulator proactively stepped up to enable corporates steer through these trying times to reduce the compliance burdens and manage uncertainty. Some of those measures were like allowing companies to hold annual general meetings through video conferencing in audio-visual modes, even extending the applicability of CARO by a year, extension of time limits for quarterly and yearly financial results, and providing guidance on COVID disclosures in financial results and statements. Measures are also proposed to benefit the stakeholders. For example, reduction in interest and waiver of penalties on delayed payments of direct and indirect taxes, lowering provident fund contribution by employees to enable a higher take-home, and allowing an early withdrawal of accumulation, and the recent SEBI consultation paper on independent directors. As the businesses and societies at large evolve to the next normal, so will the expectations of corporate behaviors, throwing up new challenges for all the players in the ecosystem. Corporates and their boards will undoubtedly have to adapt and adopt in cases to look to lead from the front without regulation. And regulators will have to continue to appreciate the changing business environments and societal needs to be able to find the right balance between regulation and cajoling, and to enforce with care and maturity. To sum up, the players in the corporate governance ecosystem need to push forward in the discharge of their obligations as they navigate societal expectations in the world reshaped by the pandemic. Towards this end, it is essential to remember that each player continues to work towards the common purpose of good governance, to create a stronger enabling environment built on mutual trust, understanding, and respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shamak, for that very, very, very important points that you have raised and the recommendations. Thank you very, very much for that, setting the context indeed. And with that, I now request Mr. Keki Mistry for his address and his inputs on this, please. Keki, you're on mute.
Mr. Ajay Tyagi, Chairman SEBI, Mr. Uday Kotak, Mr. Shamak Tata, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, friends, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of the National Council of Corporate Governance of CII, I would like to welcome you to the 14th Corporate Governance Summit. At the outset, I would like to personally thank each and every CII Corporate Governance Council member and their teams for their valuable time and inputs during the course of this year. The members have brought in their immense wealth of experience and knowledge to make a very positive contribution to the corporate governance landscape in India. To give you a very brief recap of the developments during the year, the Council formed 3 subgroups to examine in depth some of the topical corporate governance trends that are influencing boardroom discussions in India. The subgroups were first, number 1, on analyzing key regulatory relaxations introduced during COVID-19, which may be permanently implemented. 2, examining how boards can address cybersecurity threats and data protection mitigation measures. And 3, compiling the best practices on ESG so as to provide insights to boards on how they could incorporate sustainability as part of their strategy. Council members also provided some very valuable suggestions and inputs on various matters to improve the standards of corporate governance in India. Based on various recommendations which we received, CII submitted representations to appropriate authorities. Here I would like to sincerely thank both the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and SEBI for being extremely proactive and implementing corporate governance policies with the aim of enhancing fairness and transparency, strengthening the role of independent directors, promoting diversity, improving disclosure standards, and protecting shareholder interest. Corporate governance is often looked upon as a means to measure how well companies are run. Investors use corporate governance as an indicator to judge the quality of a company's management and the effectiveness of its board. It is now widely accepted by companies that sound principles of governance are a necessary tool for their long-term development and sustainability. It is important to recognize here that each country has to evolve governance norms that culturally best suit them. In this regard, several Indian companies have tried to imbibe international best practices in corporate governance. Corporate governance in India is unique in the sense that Indian companies can be divided broadly into 4 categories. The first is family-owned or promoter-controlled enterprises. The second is public sector enterprises. The third is multinational companies. And the fourth is private sector companies that are not family-owned and do not have a dominant promoter. Each of these boards have their own set of issues and challenges. Hence, best practices in corporate governance need to address these issues. I would like to emphasize here that many Indian companies have done very well over the years in terms of maintaining governance standards. Almost most of them have done so voluntarily, driven by their own internal policies and the desire to do the right thing. There is recognition in India that companies committed to good governance have a distinct competitive advantage along with enhanced reputation and investor trust. Global investors are extremely cautious in identifying the companies where they invest. One of their main focus areas is good governance. These investors are willing to pay a premium to companies where governance practices are perceived to be strong. No doubt in India over the years, we've had our share of corporate governance setbacks, particularly over the last decade. However, there are also several examples of leading corporate houses that have stood the test of time, created wealth, diversified their businesses, haven't compromised on their core values, and have preserved a culture of accountability. Today, I would like to talk about 6 corporate governance trends that have got traction in India in recent times. The first topic I would like to talk about is risk management. The COVID-19 crisis has increased emphasis on general preparedness for future risks. This has prompted boards and companies to test many of the baseline assumptions that were factored into their risk management analysis and to think more holistically about the risks and opportunities facing their businesses. COVID-19 is a stark reminder of the need to have robust risk management practices that are closely linked to crisis preparedness and resilience. The crisis has shown that the need for long-term strategic thinking cannot ever be overemphasized. Boards that have a long-term view have always been able to help their organizations emerge stronger after every crisis that they faced. The age-old saying that the best risk management framework is one that fortifies the balance sheet in good times so as to create sufficient ammunition to tackle a downturn held true during the pandemic, and to my mind will always hold true. The second topic I would like to speak about is the need and importance of independent directors. At its heart, the essence of corporate governance stems from the board. The board is the gatekeeper of corporate governance as it sets the tone at the top for ethical conduct. This is why investors are pushing for improved board quality. There is continued focus on the composition of the board. Particular attention is being paid to directors' skill profiles, diversity, and the making of a robust mechanism for board refreshment that goes beyond the box-ticking exercise. More is expected of today's independent directors than ever before, as the business landscape has become far more complex. Boards are having to deal with very complex issues such as economic uncertainty, market volatility, ESG issues, rapid changes in technology, cybersecurity, investor activism, media scrutiny, and there are so many other things. A board can truly operate at an optimal level only if it has truly independent directors. The difference between a good board and a great one is the quality of the individuals sitting around the table. Independent directors carry a unique responsibility of being a conduit between the various stakeholders and the management of a company. In other words, they are the gatekeepers of compliance and governance. The responsibilities placed on independent directors has been gradually increasing over the years. Under the circumstances, in my view, it would be appropriate that they be adequately compensated and incentivized for the additional time that they are required to spend on their board duties. In this regard, and again in my view, there should be no legal or regulatory bar on providing stock options to independent directors in addition to cash compensation, so long as a combination of both fall within the overall remuneration limit prescribed under the Companies Act. The final decision on whether to grant stock options to independent directors or not should be left to each company. MCA and SEBI might wish to look at this at some point. The third trend I would like to talk about is the expectation from an independent director to dedicate more time on board duties. Over the years, the average time commitment for board service has exploded. In the West, the number of hours a director commits to preparing for and attending meetings varies, but according to an article published by NASDAQ, it is reasonable to expect a director to average somewhere around 300 hours of work per year. Many Indian companies are now beginning to induct independent directors who can commit more time and effort while being on the board. The fourth trend I wish to talk about is the reshaping of the board. The need for maximizing the expertise of the board has become very critical as a result of COVID-19. During these turbulent times, board members who had diverse experience were able to bring in their industry knowledge to guide the company through this extremely difficult period. Diversity has in recent times become a big focus area for investors who want to see an increased diversity of thought and experience to better enable the board to identify risks and improve all-round performance. According to the global executive search firm Egon Zehnder, between 2012 and 2020, India has seen an 8.6% increase in the number of women on boards, with women today holding 17% of board positions. Boards are also striving to improve the quality of their board evaluation criteria and are developing approaches to engage with investors on board effectiveness. The fifth theme I wish to talk about is shareholder activism. The agenda of activists typically revolves around issues relating to corporate governance, such as replacing management, board composition, dividend payouts, new director appointments, and executive compensation. A key factor contributing to shareholder activism in recent years is the role of proxy advisory firms. These firms have played an influential role, and I think a very important role also, in making recommendations to institutional investors on how to vote at shareholder meetings. Shareholder activism in India is likely to become more pronounced in the years to come. The sixth and last theme I wish to talk about is whistleblowing. While I truly believe that a robust whistleblower policy is an extremely important and critical element of internal control. It is also equally important to ensure that there are sufficient checks and balances in the system so that malified intentions are discouraged. Just as there are individuals who are motivated by a sense of moral conscience and are acting for the good of the organization, there are opportunists who are seeking ill of the company and are acting out of greed, revenge, or to advance their careers. Whistleblowing can be resorted to not only by people who wish well of the company, but in many instances by dissatisfied employees, jealous competitors, or by dissatisfied customers who hold a grievance against the management or the company. Malicious and irresponsible whistleblowing, if publicized, can impact stock prices, affect shareholder perception, and tarnish the image of an organization. I do believe that genuine whistleblowers need to be both encouraged and rewarded. However, there needs to be a mechanism put in place that penalizes complaints with dishonest intent. Let me conclude by saying that the bar continues to rise for Indian boards. India Inc. is proceeding on the right path in establishing best practices in governance. At the same time, governance in India has a unique flavor, and I do believe that both SEBI and MCA are taking this into consideration while framing new laws and regulations. Commitment to good governance leads to distinctive competitive advantage, enhances reputation, and creates long-term sustainability. Organized need to focus on prudence and long-term growth, irrespective of economic cycles. I am confident that corporate governance practices in India will continue to keep improving, which will enable easier access to capital from global markets and greater transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Keki. Thanks for that address. Thanks for really capturing some very, very important points and trends. With that, may I now request Mr. Uday Kotak, the CII President, to give his remarks and address, please. Sir?
Thank you, Chandrajit. Chairman SEBI, Mr. Tyagi, Keki, Mr. Shamal Tata, my colleague Chandrajit, and ladies and gentlemen. What a year we have had. If we sort of rewind 1 year ago, we could not imagine what was in store for us. And when I think back about our economy over last 1 year's period, one of the most defining aspects of this economy was the way the capital markets stood by and supported the economy. We saw probably amongst the highest levels of fundraise. We saw an active and a functioning capital market, and the regulators SEBI and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs on their toes to do what is right for markets, its functioning, and ensuring a delicate balance between the interests of issuers and investors. And it is here that I think we have actually had a great support to our economy at a time of a crisis, probably once in 100 years. And I wanted to compliment Chairman Tyagi for his outstanding proactive role in these very turbulent times, along with his team. In many ways, the definition of the haves and the have-nots in the last 1 year has been turned on its top to those who had access to capital and those who did not. And people who had access to capital, irrespective of the sectors, including in stress sectors, were able to survive and navigate their way over the last 1 year, and probably will do so even as we go forward. Therefore, in this definition, the new definition, as I call of the haves and the have-nots, it inevitably comes with a great responsibility on those who have access to capital to be responsible for the capital they get. And it is in this context that if you want access to capital, corporate India, we need to have better and a continuing improvement in our governance standards as a core to our future. And the success and failures of enterprise are now being determined by this very important point in front of us. And in that context, I would also like to highlight the importance of corporate governance for financial intermediaries as well. And it is here too, over last 1 year, we have made significant progress. When I look at, say, the area of stockbroking, there was a concern about misuse of client shares, and we saw extremely fast action by the regulator to ensure that the integrity of markets, integrity of property rights are something which we need to keep at the heart of building a sound marketplace. Similarly, we have just recently seen a situation of excessive leverage provided by intermediaries. In the US, the Archegos debacle, where quite a few financial intermediaries gave excessive leverage to a counterparty. I think in that context, SEBI's moves on appropriate margining for investors and brokerage firms is a step towards ensuring that we have a healthy governance of the financial intermediaries who are the connect between issuers and investors. And in that context, also the streamlining of the mutual fund industry is something which is got to be noted. Therefore, corporate governance, defining the difference between who sustain and survive through the capital market route, and the governance of the pipes and the intermediaries is at the core of what I think we have done in the last 12 months, but it is a continuing path. Some of the dilemmas which we face from a policy point of view and a practice point of view is finally when we talk about corporate governance, who are we representing and what are we talking about? At the heart, I believe governance is about taking care of the entire body of shareholders. And an inevitable dilemma comes in that finally there is a potential tension between what you call as the majority shareholders and the minority shareholders. And how do you ensure that we govern for all shareholders and not sway in one direction disproportionately? And in some ways, I would use a simple principle. We certainly need to be guarded against oppression of minority by the majority shareholders, something which we need to protect. At the same time, we should not swing to what I call as the other end, where a small group of minority shareholders can hold a company to ransom. Therefore, getting this very delicate balance for ensuring the interests of all shareholders is at the core of what I call as good governance. COVID-19 has also brought to the fore a very important point in a corporate journey. It has highlighted that doing good and doing well are both in the same direction. And companies of the future who will succeed are those who can do good and do well. The whole drive on ESG as the core to who we are as a corporate citizen is going to be the crucial part for us to define our destiny. I also want to touch on the role of directors. The collective board of directors, whether dependent or not, whether independent or not non-independent, have a fiduciary responsibility to function as a cohesive board. Yes, independent directors have a role to guard against oppression by dominant shareholders or board members, but at the same time, a collective functioning particularly in the post-COVID era is going to be important. Speed of decision making in disruptive times is crucial. And therefore, how do we get directors, particularly independent directors, get that objective right? We have found in many cases the risk of independent directors getting too much to start protecting their back more than what is right for the company. At the same time, we have seen independent directors who have become too much tick the box. How do we get independent directors to understand that their role is a constructive role, but an objective role in building of a corporation? And you neither need to protect your back, nor can you just tick the box. And finally, in terms of policymaking, Sir Chairman, I must first say that we have come a long way since you had given Keki Mistry and myself and many others the privilege to be on a committee which you appointed in 2017, June to October. And since then, under your leadership, many changes have come to the fore to improve the governance of corporate India in this very turbulent times between 2017 and 2021. But I genuinely believe the Indian mindset and the Indian cultural ethos makes it easier for us to walk down an evolutionary path rather than a revolutionary path. But it is important to continue to walk the path without going off the path. And in that context, I once again wanted to say that capital markets are the engine for India's growth, and policymakers across the spectrum need to keep in mind that this engine needs to be nurtured and sustained. And I once again thank all the participants today for joining this conference, and I eagerly look forward to listening to the views of Chairman SEBI. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Uday. Thanks a lot. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to request Mr. Ajay Tyagi, Chairman of SEBI, for his keynote address as a chief guest, please. Thank you.
Shri Uday Kotak, Shri K.K. Mistry, Shri Shamak Tata, Shri Chandrajit Banerjee, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking CII for organizing this summit on an all-important topic of corporate governance and giving me an opportunity to share my views on the same with you. An effective and high standard of corporate governance is a prerequisite for sustainability and success of companies in the long run. In case of listed corporates which raise funds from public, having a credible and robust corporate governance framework is sacrosanct to ensure transparency, remove asymmetry of information, and enhance investors' trust. Globally, corporate governance has been a subject of endless discussions and debate. Yet, there is no unique answer as to how an ideal corporate governance framework should look like. While broad objectives of improving corporate governance could be similar, different jurisdictions in the world may have divergent requirements to achieve the same. This could depend upon various factors such as level of development, maturity of corporate culture, stakeholders, perspectives, ownership structures, legacy issues, etc. Even within a country, there could be different sets of challenges faced by different types of companies. Thus, a one-size-fits-all policy won't work. We at SEBI have attempted to balance out the global best practices on the subject and the domestic scenario. SEBI's LODR regulations, the regulations which specify the norms for corporate governance for listed companies in India, are largely in line with the OECD principles of corporate governance. However, we have suitably tweaked the norms to make them more relevant for the domestic requirements. For instance, in countries like US and UK, where the ownership of companies is generally dispersed, the governance issues arise primarily out of the separation of ownership from management. Corporate governance rules are also framed accordingly. In India, however, concentrated ownership has been the practice. This results in its own kind of issues between the majority and minority shareholders, and our norms accordingly try to address the same. Corporate governance, as the previous speakers have also highlighted, is indeed a very wide subject. I would like to delve upon some of the recent initiatives and emerging issues. First, I'll come to independent directors. At the outset, I must admit that notwithstanding various efforts made in the past, we are yet to get ideal solutions to issues such as ensuring independence of independent directors, selecting the best suited persons as independent directors, making their role more effective and meaningful, etc. Recently, as a part of our continuous efforts in this direction, we came out with a consultation paper touching upon some of these issues. I would not go into the specifics as the paper is already in the public domain, and we will analyze public comments before taking an appropriate view in due course. However, I am tempted to clarify on some of the points raised in various media articles. Some articles have opined that there is a tendency to portray the promoters in a bad light, and that there is too much focus on only one set of stakeholders, that is minority shareholders. I would like to clarify that we at SEBI acknowledge the very important role played by the promoters, entrepreneurs in wealth creation. SEBI has actually over the period taken a number of steps to improve the ease of compliance by the promoters. To cite some recent examples, we have reviewed the regulatory framework for reclassification of promoter group, and have eased several requirements such as giving exemption from the requirement of shareholder approval in cases where the shareholding of promoter seeking reclassification is less than 1%, or when reclassification of promoter is pursuant to an open offer under the takeover regulations. We have revamped the entire rights issue process during the last about a year to make fundraising through this route easier, faster, and more cost effective. Recently, last month only, to facilitate easier fundraising, we have reviewed the framework for innovators growth platform to make the platform more accessible to the startups and new age entrepreneurs. While we are cognizant of the critical role the promoters play in our economy, the problem arises, as some of the previous speakers also noted, when some of the errant controlling shareholders attempt to misuse their dominant position to the detriment of the others. Among other consequences, such a behavior diminishes the trust of all stakeholders in the system. To address this issue, more power has been given to minority shareholders under the regulations in certain areas, such as related party transactions through majority of minority principle in voting. At the same time, we acknowledge that there is a need to have a fine balance between the role and responsibilities of controlling shareholders and minority shareholders, as rightly pointed out by Mr. Kotak, so that the latter do not misuse the power given to them for protection of their rights. As an example, the proposals for appointment, reappointment, and removal of independent directors in our consultation paper try to strike a balance between the majority shareholders' right to the final decision and the minority shareholders' ability to somewhat influence the same. Yet another issue commonly raised is that howsoever we may strengthen the processes related to independent directors, ones who are genuinely not independent will never be. It is true that human behavior cannot be fully regulated by norms. However, it is our endeavor through improved processes and disclosures to bring in greater balance, transparency, and quality in the selection of independent directors and functioning of the corporate boards. Next, I will come to the issue of gender sensitivity on the boards. As a thumb rule, one would expect women who represent half of the population to be as much represented, if not half, at least somewhat close to that figure on the board of companies. However, as we all know, the actual figures are nowhere close to that. It is not merely a social issue. There are several economic and governance benefits as well of bringing greater gender diversity on the boards. There is evidence-based research across the world which shows that companies having better gender diversity on their board have generally outperformed financially those which did not have such diversity. We in India, similar to certain European countries, adopted the approach of mandatory representation of women on companies' board. The regulatory push by Ministry of Corporate Affairs and SEBI has definitely improved women representation on corporate boards in India. From around 5 to 6% women on board in 2014, the number increased to 12% within just a year in 2015 for top 500 companies. The number has been steadily increasing year on year and stands at around 17% for top 500 companies today. At an overall level, the figure stands at around 19%. In the OECD and developed countries, the figure is more than 25%. While there has been an improvement in gender diversity at the board level, data shows that representation of women in key board committees such as Audit Committee and Nomination and Remuneration Committee remains quite low at around 7%. Clearly, we still have a long way to go. My next item for discussion is separation of roles of Chairperson and MD and CEO. The underlying idea for such a separation is not to weaken the position of promoter, but to improve corporate governance. The objective is to provide a better and more balanced governance structure by enabling more effective supervision of the management. Separation of roles would reduce excessive concentration of authority in a single individual. Having the same person as chairman and MD brings in conflict of interest. Globally also, the needle seems to be moving towards the separation of chairman and MD CEO posts. In UK and Australia, the debate has tilted in favor of separating them. Germany and Netherlands have a two-tier board structure separating the roles of board and management. The OECD, the international standard setter for corporate governance, also recommends that the two posts should be separated as a good governance practice. Turning to implementation of this principle in our jurisdiction, listed entities were initially required to separate the roles of chairperson, MD, and CEO from 1st April 2020. However, based on industry representations, an additional time period of 2 years was given for compliance. The regulation would now be applicable to top 500 listed entities by market capitalization with effect from 1st April 2022. As at the end of December 2020, only 53% of the top 500 listed companies had complied with this provision. I urge and in fact request the eligible listed entities to be prepared for this change in advance of the deadline. I come to the topic of stewardship code. World over, institutional investors in capital markets are expected to shoulder greater responsibility towards their client and beneficiaries. Meaningful engagement with the investee companies, including their credible monitoring, commonly referred to as stewardship responsibilities, is all the more important in the Indian context, where there are concentrated ownerships and non-institutional investors may lack awareness. The institutional investors can and should act as a counterforce to any unwanted decision being pushed in the board, which may not be in the interest of all stakeholders. Institutional investors need to formulate comprehensive policy on the discharge of their stewardship responsibilities, publicly disclose it, and review the same periodically. In December 2019, SEBI prescribed stewardship code for mutual funds and all categories of AIFs in relation to their investments in listed equities. This code has been implemented from 1st July 2020. In order to further improve transparency, SEBI has recently mandated mutual funds to cast votes compulsorily in case of company resolutions on some specified matters. I would strongly urge the other institutional participants in the corporates, such as banks, insurance companies, and pension funds, to also follow transparent stewardship code so as to be truly accountable to their clients or beneficiaries. Coming to ESG framework, worldwide there is now an increased focus on ESG investing. As per an estimate, total assets in sustainability funds have increased threefold from $550 billion in March 2018 to around $1.6 trillion in December 2020, managed by more than 4,000 ESG-based funds globally. Further, COVID-19 pandemic has also heightened the focus on sustainability-related risks. The November 2020 US Federal Reserve Financial Stability Report acknowledged for the first time the impact of climate risks on financial stability. Companies across the globe are facing pressure from their investors and increasingly from regulators to disclose their ESG-related risks and opportunities. Similar trend is seen domestically also. During 2021, that is last year, ESG-themed NFOs accounted for about 1/10 of the total number of NFOs and 1/8 of the amount mobilized by all of them. As on March 25th this year, the assets under management of domestic mutual fund schemes with ESG theme stood at rupees 10,830 crore, which is 3 times the AUM as at the end of March 2020. Taking cognizance of this trend, SEBI revamped the business responsibility reporting, which has been in place since 2012, and expanded its scope. SEBI board has recently approved a new framework for business responsibility and sustainability reporting, that is BRSR, for top 1,000 listed companies by market capitalization for reporting on a voluntary basis from the year 2021-22 and on mandatory basis from 2022-23. The structure of the BRSR is segregated under essential or mandatory indicators and leadership or voluntary indicators. The BRSR lays considerable emphasis on quantifiable metrics, which allows for easy measurement and comparability across companies, sectors, and time periods. Further, the disclosures on climate and social, that is, employees, consumers, communities related issues of the entity have been significantly enhanced and made more granular. The new reporting requirements are expected to bring in greater transparency through disclosure of material ESG related information to enable market participants to identify and assess sustainability related risks and opportunities. Since governance is a key element of ESG framework, the new framework emphasizes on oversight by boards in identifying sustainability related challenges, setting targets, and monitoring performance against the same. Now, coming to how COVID has changed the outlook and role of boards, I chose to speak on this serious topic towards the end, as starting with it perhaps would have overshadowed the discussion on other important aspects of corporate governance which I just covered. Now, since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic with its attendant uncertainties and accompanied restrictions, corporate boards across the world are facing complex new problems to tackle with. Corporate governance discussions are increasingly being held on areas such as dealing with uncertainties, crisis management, and sustainability. A critical area that emerged during this pandemic was the need to provide adequate level of disclosures to stakeholders about the health and performance of the company amid the uncertainty. The company boards should ensure that adequate disclosures are provided timely to stakeholders and there is no asymmetry of information. Disclosures should include the impact of COVID-19 on business performance and financials. SEBI had issued an advisory last year providing an illustrative list of information that should be disclosed relating to the impact of COVID-19 crisis. It is important to ensure that when listed entities disclose material information relating to the impact of this pandemic, they should not resort to selective disclosures, keeping in mind the principles of governing disclosures. Risk assessment, as some of the previous speakers also rightly brought out, has emerged as another prime issue. Company boards need to critically consider if they are looking at right risks by remaining active in their risk assessment activities. This includes paying attention to new emerging risks, reassessing resilience, and preparing the organization for any future event that could result in similar business disruptions as COVID-19 pandemic. SEBI has recently decided to enhance the applicability of Risk Management Committee to top 1,000 listed entities by market capitalization from the existing top 500 companies. The constitution and role of Risk Management Committee have also been revamped. Technology played a critical role in facilitating relatively smooth corporate functioning during this difficult period. The lockdown and social distancing requirements led to most corporate permitting their employees to work from home. Physical meetings have got replaced by video conferences, with Ministry of Corporate Affairs permitting AGMs through VC, other audio-visual means. Virtual AGMs became the norm. In view of the increasing use of technology, sound digital infrastructure, and high standards relating to data protection and cybersecurity are of utmost importance. Now, to conclude, I see from the agenda that the summit themes include important corporate governance topics of relevance today. My considered view is that rather than laying too much of emphasis on command and control mechanisms, it is the self-discipline and sincerity of boards and other stakeholders in carrying out their responsibilities which provide the bedrock for a clean, transparent, and trustworthy corporate governance regime. Corporates following such a regime in turn enjoy continued support from investors even during difficult times and stand to reap the benefits in the long run. Thus, success in earning trust of stakeholders lies in our own sincere conduct. The changing landscape on account of pandemic has made the company board's job even more demanding. The recent surge in number of COVID-infected persons and various restrictions imposed in different parts of the country pose additional challenges. Corporate India has shown character, maturity, and resilience to deal with the situation since March 2020, and I am sure that the corporates would continue to demonstrate the same going forward. Thank you, and all the very best for a successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taggi, for important and a very detailed address to the industry and to all the stakeholders. Your participation today is indeed so very important, and you've covered such important and critical issues. We thank you very much for this constant dialoguing with the Indian industry. Your visions, your thoughts and directions are of great importance and value. And today, the points that you have mentioned really forms a very solid foundation for us to deliberate in the Corporate Governance Summit over today and tomorrow. And we really value SEBI's engagement with the industry. And thank you very much, sir, for again participating and for being with us here today. I'll also like to thank Mr. Uday Kotak, Mr. K.K. Mistry, and Mr. Shamak Tata for mentioning some very valuable, insightful points at the inaugural session. And we have a galaxy of very strong participants from the industry and other stakeholders in this Corporate Governance Summit. And this inaugural session has really set the ball rolling very strongly. Thank you once again, everybody. And thank you once again, Mr. Taggi, for participating here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee and Mr. Kotak and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.